Welcome back to Calm Coding, the show where we explore all things cybersecurity. I'm Cody.
And I'm Katie.
This week, we are diving into a collection of recent cybersecurity incidents and trends that they highlight how creative these attackers are getting.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so we got everything from compromised cloud environments used to launch phishing campaigns to these things called polyglot files, which sound like they're straight out of a spy movie.
They do, don't they?
Our mission for this deep dive is to give you, the listener, a clear picture of what is happening and why it should matter to you.
For sure.
So let's jump right in. First up, we have hackers using misconfigured AWS instances to launch some pretty effective phishing campaigns.
Oh, wow.
What's fascinating to me here is that they're actually using legitimate AWS services like SES and Workmail to send these phishing emails. It's like sending a letter with a real postmark, but the letter inside is a total scam.
It's very sneaky.
Exactly. And because it's coming from a trusted source, people are much more likely to fall for it.
Makes sense.
This particular group is called Java Ghost, and they've been around for a while. But it seems like they've recently shifted their focus to financial gain.
Yeah, that shift towards financially motivated attacks is something we're seeing more and more of these days.
Definitely. They are obtaining AWS access keys, often through these misconfigurations, and using those keys to create temporary accounts and set up their entire phishing infrastructure.
Wow.
And to make matters worse, they're even creating unused IAM users as a way to maintain persistent access to these compromised environments.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's like leaving a hidden back door just in case they need to get back in later.
It's a good reminder that securing cloud environments is absolutely crucial.
Absolutely. And it's not just about setting things up correctly initially, but it's also about having ongoing audits and monitoring to make sure everything stays secure.
For sure.
Okay, shifting gears a bit, our next story takes us to the UAE, where aviation firms were targeted by a BEC attack using a technique called polyglot files.
Oh, I love that name, polyglot files.
Now, these polyglot files are particularly interesting.
Yeah, the name itself sounds super complicated.
They are pretty clever, though. Imagine a file that looks like a harmless PDF to your antivirus,
Yeah.
but it actually contains hidden code that can infect your computer. That's what a polyglot file does. It's a master of disguise.
So it can basically bypass traditional security tools because it looks like something it's not.
Precisely. And in this case, the attackers, who are being called UNK Crafty Camel, actually compromised a legitimate Indian electronics company to send these files from a trusted email address.
Oh, wow.
So it looks even more convincing.
So it wasn't just the file itself that was disguised, but the entire email seemed to come from a legitimate source.
Right. And their goal was to install a custom backdoor called Sosano, which was designed to be extremely stealthy. They even went as far as bloating its size with unused libraries and delaying its execution, all to avoid detection.
Wow, they really put a lot of effort into making this as sneaky as possible.
They did. It highlights the fact that attackers are constantly developing new techniques and getting more sophisticated.
Yeah.
We can't just rely on our old security measures. We need to be constantly adapting and evolving our defenses as well.
Absolutely.
Moving on to the mobile world, we have some news about the BadBox malware.
Oh, I've heard about this one. It's pretty nasty, right?
Yeah. The bad news is that BadBox, which essentially turns infected Android devices into residential proxies for all sorts of cybercrime, has come back with a vengeance in the form of BadBox 2.0.
And as you can probably guess, version 2.0 is rarely a good thing in the malware world.
It seems like they've managed to infect even more devices this time around.
Oh, no.
But here's the silver lining. Security researchers from Human, along with Google and other partners, have been working hard to disrupt this operation.
That's good to hear. How are they doing that?
They've been removing malicious apps from the Play Store, and more importantly, they've been sinkholing domains used by the BadBox botnet. So if you imagine the botnet as this network of infected devices, all communicating with the command and control server, sinkholing is like redirecting that traffic to a safe server controlled by, well, the good guys.
So essentially cutting off communication between the malware and the attackers.
Exactly. And this is a huge win because it significantly disrupts the botnet's operations.
Right.
This whole situation really underscores the importance of being careful about where we get our apps from and, of course, keeping our devices updated.
Absolutely. Buying apps from trusted sources and installing updates as soon as they're available can significantly reduce your risk.
Now, speaking of things that can be used for malicious purposes, let's talk about deepfakes.
I feel like deepfakes are becoming more and more prevalent these days.
Unfortunately, you're right. And it's not just about creating funny videos anymore. Deepfakes are now being used in scams, and it's costing people a lot of money. Research has shown that deepfake calls are costing British victims hundreds of pounds each. And 1 in 10 unexpected calls could be fraudulent.
Those are some pretty alarming statistics.
And it's not just about stealing money directly. Deepfakes can also be used to manipulate people into giving up sensitive information or taking actions that compromise their security.
Right.
One common scam involves impersonating tax authorities, like the HMRC in the UK, and scaring people into handing over their personal details.
So it's not just about being cautious about what we click on or download anymore. We also have to be wary of what we hear.
Exactly. And this raises a really important question. How do we protect ourselves in a world where we can't even trust our own ears?
Well, I think it starts with awareness. The more we know about these scams and how they work, the better equipped we are to spot them. And there are some practical steps we can take as well, like establishing safe words with family and friends. So if someone calls claiming to be your mom, you can ask them the safe word. And if they don't know it, you know it's a scam.
It's a simple but effective way to add an extra layer of verification.
It's like having a secret code that only you and the real person would know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in this age of deepfakes and increasingly sophisticated social engineering tactics, any extra layer of protection can make a huge difference.
I agree.
Okay, moving on from deepfakes, we have another story that highlights how attackers are exploiting the trust we place in familiar tools.
Oh, I hate when that happens. It's like a betrayal of trust.
This time, it's Microsoft Teams and OneDrive.
I use those all the time. How are they being exploited?
Hackers are using Teams as a social engineering platform to gain credentials for remote access tools. So they're tricking people into giving up their login information.
Oh, no.
Right. And once they have access to those tools, they can then leverage legitimate OneDrive tools like OneDriveStandaloneUpdater.exe to sideload malicious .ll files.
So they're using trusted software for nefarious purposes.
Exactly. And that's what makes this particularly concerning. Traditional antivirus software might not catch these attacks because they're piggybacking on legitimate processes.
It's like a wolf in sheep's clothing, digitally speaking.
This just goes to show that we can't let our guard down even when using tools we think we know and trust.
Right. Vigilance is key.
All right. For our final story today, we're going to talk about a Chinese threat actor known as Silk Typhoon.
I'm already intrigued. What have they been up to?
Silk Typhoon has been making some interesting moves lately, shifting their focus to targeting cloud applications and remote management tools.
Why the change in strategy?
Well, as organizations move more of their operations to the cloud, attackers are following the data. They're using stolen API keys and credentials to gain access to customer environments of targeted companies.
This is why strong password hygiene and multi-factor authentication are so critical. We need to make it as difficult as possible for attackers to get their hands on our sensitive information.
Couldn't agree more. And remember that U.S. Treasury hack from a while back? Silk Typhoon was reportedly behind that incident.
Wow, so they're not just going after small fish. That was a pretty big target.
It really highlights just how sophisticated and well-resourced some of these threat actors have become.
It definitely reinforces the need for organizations of all sizes to prioritize cybersecurity and invest in robust defenses.
So after hearing all of these stories, what is the key takeaway for our listener? What should they be thinking about as they navigate this constantly evolving cyber landscape?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that we can't afford to be complacent. The cyber threat landscape is constantly changing, and attackers are always coming up with new and innovative ways to exploit vulnerabilities. We've seen how they're leveraging our trust in familiar tools, using advanced techniques to bypass security measures, and targeting everything from personal devices to large organizations.
It's a constant arms race. But instead of weapons, it's code. And the battlefield is the digital world.
And the stakes are incredibly high. Data breaches can have devastating consequences for individuals and businesses alike.
So what can people do to protect themselves? Besides listening to Calm Coding every week, of course.
Of course. I would say strong password hygiene is a must. Don't use the same password across multiple accounts, and make sure those passwords are complex and not easily guessable.
Absolutely.
And enable multi-factor authentication wherever possible. It adds an extra layer of security that makes it much harder for attackers to gain unauthorized access.
For sure.
Also, be wary of phishing attacks. Think before you click on links, especially in emails or messages from unknown senders.
Right.
And keep your software and devices updated. Updates often include security patches that address known vulnerabilities.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about technical safeguards, but we can't forget about the human element. Be aware of social engineering tactics. Attackers often try to manipulate people into giving up sensitive information or taking actions that compromise security.
Right. So if something feels off, if a request seems unusual or out of character, trust your gut and don't be afraid to ask questions or verify the legitimacy of the request.
Absolutely.
And finally, I would say, don't be afraid to seek help. There are tons of resources available online and through organizations like the National Cybersecurity Alliance.
Absolutely. And remember, cybersecurity is a shared responsibility. We all have a role to play in keeping ourselves and our data safe.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, on that note, I think it is time to wrap up this episode of Calm Coding. Thanks for joining us in this deep dive into the world of cybersecurity. And remember, stay vigilant, stay informed, and keep coding safely out there.
Yeah, until next time. Yeah, it really is fascinating to see how AI is changing the game in both attack and defense.
And it makes you wonder, what skills will be most valuable in cybersecurity as AI becomes even more prevalent?
That's a great question to consider. Maybe it will be a combination of technical expertise and those uniquely human skills,
Yeah.
you know, like critical thinking and adaptability.
Perhaps the cybersecurity professionals of the future will need to be part programmer, part strategist, and part psychologist.
Definitely. It's definitely going to be an interesting journey.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today,
Yeah.
from compromised cloud environments to deepfakes and the rise of AI in cybersecurity.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. But I think it's important to remember that knowledge is power.
True.
The more we understand about these threats, the better equipped we are to protect ourselves. And that's exactly why we do these deep dives.
Right.
We want to give you the information you need to stay ahead of the curve and keep your data safe.
Absolutely.
So for our listener who might be feeling a little overwhelmed right now, what are some key takeaways or actionable steps they can take to improve their cybersecurity posture?
Well, I think the first step is to really embrace the idea that cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility. It's not just about having the latest and greatest security tools. It's about being aware of the threats and taking those proactive steps to protect yourself. And that starts with the basics.
Like using strong passwords and enabling multi-factor authentication.
Exactly. And being cautious about what you click on and what you download, especially in emails or messages from unknown senders.
Right, phishing attacks are still one of the most common ways for attackers to gain access to our systems.
They are. And as we saw with those polyglot files, they are getting more and more sophisticated.
It's important to remember that attackers are constantly looking for new ways to exploit our trust and our vulnerabilities. So we need to be constantly learning and adapting our defenses.
Absolutely. Now, we've talked a lot about technical safeguards, but I think it's equally important to emphasize the human element as well.
What do you mean by that?
Well, as we've seen with deepfakes and social engineering tactics, attackers are often relying on human psychology to manipulate people into making mistakes. They prey on our fears, our curiosity, and our desire to be helpful.
So how can we protect ourselves against these psychological attacks?
I think it starts with awareness.
All right.
Being aware of the tactics that attackers use and being skeptical of requests that seem unusual or out of character.
Trust your gut.
Right. If something feels off, don't be afraid to ask questions or verify the legitimacy of the request. And remember, it's okay to say no. You don't have to give out sensitive information or take actions that make you feel uncomfortable.
Absolutely. And if you are ever unsure about something, don't hesitate to seek help. There are tons of resources available online and through organizations like the National Cybersecurity Alliance.
Yeah. There are also people you can talk to within your own organization, like your IT department or a security team. They're there to help.
Exactly. Cybersecurity is a team effort. We all need to work together to protect ourselves and our data. So to wrap up, what's the one message you would like to leave our listener with today?
I would say, stay informed, stay vigilant, and don't be afraid to ask for help. We're all in this together.
Well said. I think that's a great message to end on. Cybersecurity is a shared responsibility, and we all have a role to play.
Absolutely. It's been a fascinating deep dive today. We've covered a lot of ground, and I hope our listener feels more informed and empowered to navigate this complex world of cybersecurity.
I think we've given them a lot to think about,
Yeah.
especially with that final thought about the role of AI in the future of cybersecurity.
It's definitely something to keep an eye on.
And remember, folks, knowledge is power.
It is.
The more we understand about these threats, the better prepared we'll be to defend against them.
Yeah.
So stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe out there. Thanks for joining us on Calm Coding. Until next time, keep coding calmly.